Some would say the most successful nonprofits are those that innovate. By pursuing creativity and embracing new approaches, nonprofits can maximize their impact and address complex issues more efficiently. However, turning innovative ideas into action is not an easy task. So, what strategies can nonprofits employ to effectively transform their ideas into action? I'm Josh with Anedot, and welcome to Nonprofit Pulse, where we explore trends, insights, and resources that help nonprofits accomplish their mission. On this episode, we're joined by Leah Kral on the topic of nonprofit innovation for social change. Leah is the Senior Director of Strategy and Innovation at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. She's a sought-after speaker at nonprofit industry events, writes frequently about her research, offers tailored consulting to nonprofit teams, and provides coaching to social entrepreneurs across the country. Hi, Leah. Thanks for joining us on Nonprofit Pulse.
Hi, Josh. I'm so excited to be here today.
Yes, excited to talk about your book today and innovation for social change and getting into how wildly successful nonprofits inspire and deliver results. So maybe first, let's just talk about inspiration for the book. Was there a particular story or an event that inspired your research and writing on this?
Definitely. My career ended up taking some unexpected twists and turns. I actually started out in my early career for about the first 7 years in the for-profit world. So I was working in industry and quality systems and engineering. And while I was learning and growing, I just didn't feel like it was my calling. I felt like something was missing, but I wasn't sure what. And my husband, who is far more adventurous than I am, had this kind of lifelong dream to experience overseas development in the Peace Corps. And so because I was going through this career uncertainty myself, we just together thought, well, if there's ever a time. So we signed up as a married couple, and we ended up going to Jamaica in the Peace Corps together for 2 years. And it was the whole experience. Those 2 years in Jamaica just completely rocked my world. During that time, I worked with primarily with Habitat for Humanity, and I taught computer literacy at a teacher's college in a kind of a violent part of Kingston, the capital city. And during that, it was just amazing, and life-changing, those things that I was experiencing. I saw extreme poverty, unlike anything I'd seen in the U.S. I would see families living in shacks that they had built by hand. I saw entire communities swept away by hurricanes. And I remember the first time getting a tour of my teacher's college where I'd be working, and someone pointed out what they called the library. And I just felt tears welling up, just all these things we take for granted in the U.S. So despite seeing kind of all this hardship and poverty, I also saw heroes. And I always think of that quote by Fred Rogers. I think it was during September 11th, where he said, in times of crisis, look for the heroes or look for the helpers, something like that. And that's what I saw. And I was just blown away by, the heroes, the nonprofits, the people just doing good in this very tough environment. And so that all got me interested. When I came home to the U.S., I just kept thinking about how do we solve these things and what are real solutions to poverty? And from then on, I knew I wanted to work with those people who were doing that important work of social change. And in hindsight, I'm so glad I got to have, I think it's unusual that I got to have a foot in both worlds. I got to, be a part of the private sector and, get to learn from those great management thinkers, people like Drucker and Covey and Deming, and that sticks with me to this day. But then I also got exposure to the world of philanthropy. And what I wanted to do in my career was find some way to combine the intersection of those two worlds, entrepreneurially problem solving and building empowered teams with the very best management frameworks that are tailored thoughtfully for the nonprofit world. And that's really what I've been doing for the last 2 decades. I really am enjoying it. And then just maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, my executive director approached me and said, "Hey, we have been hearing good things about these workshops that you're doing with our teams, helping them think through strategy and being effective. Why don't you put it into book form and you can do it on our time?" And that just blew me away. And, of course, I jumped at that opportunity. And so that's how my book started taking shape. My passion and what I knew I wanted to do with the book was really help those busy nonprofit practitioners to be their innovative best.
I love that. That's such an interesting story. And especially the 2 years in Jamaica. I'm sure y'all made a lot of memories there. You mentioned some hard ones, but I'm sure some good ones too. And have y'all been back since?
I have not been back, but definitely stayed in touch with. We each had our separate host families that we were living with, and we stay in touch with them and other volunteers and families that we worked with. And in fact, I just made a LinkedIn post this morning about my book, and a friend from Jamaica was commenting on it. So, yeah, I'd love to get back. It's a beautiful, beautiful country.
That's cool. So in the book, you outline 6 principles for sparking innovation. Could you lay those out for us, and then maybe share a story of how one of them was successfully implemented by a nonprofit?
Definitely. Yeah. So after I wrote the book, then I wanted to synthesize the whole thing in like a punchy way. And that's where these 6 principles came about. So the first principle is, like a detective, be a fearless and relentless problem solver. You want to identify hidden needs. And then the second is encouraging people to ideate. We want to start small but dream big, whether we're designing small experiments or identifying partners and building ecosystems for social change. We should be bold in how we think through where we want to go and how we might get there. The third principle is to unlock potential. We want to create a collaborative workplace culture that leaves room for experimentation and play, spontaneity, and discovery. The fourth would be to unlock even more potential and empower bottom-up decision-making, encourage savvy risk-taking, and reward tough-minded trade-off thinking. I work with a lot of economists, so I just kind of that I'm absorbing some of these principles by osmosis from them. But that tough-minded trade-off thinking, in some ways, comes from economics. The fifth is we want to clarify what's working and what's not through continuous learning and stress testing to accelerate your impact. We want to build a common sense evaluation approach that supports agility, experimentation, and team learning. And the last principle, 6, is persuasion. We have to be in the nonprofit space. We have to be really good at persuasion. We want our ideas to stand out from the crowd. We have to secure resources, and we want to win buy-in for our good ideas. So those 6 principles are really pretty intertwined. They all work together, and they're then sprinkled throughout the book with a lot of stories. And to your question, so what's a story, an example of this? So a story I love is from a 100-year-old Catholic prep school in New Jersey. And in the late 1960s, Newark, New Jersey was experiencing a lot of civil unrest. There was violence, there were riots, buildings were razed, the National Guard was called in. And so in the midst of this, many Newark businesses were closing down, closing their doors. The school itself closed its doors. And so during this time of uncertainty, most of the school staff left. They moved away, but there was a handful of very determined teachers and staff who decided, no, we're going to stay. And they wanted to serve the community, and they knew this wasn't going to be easy. The community had very radically changed. The demographics of the neighborhood changed. The school lost many of their donors who were angry that the school didn't move out into the white suburbs. And one of the donors even said, I won't give you a dime for what you did. So there was this tension and animosity, and they were, losing their funding. But this core group of teachers who decided to stay, they were there, they were committed, and they wanted to radically transform the school. And then they did. And the story of this is so amazing. The end results are impressive. Currently, 98% of the students at St. Benedict's Prep School go to college, and 82% have completed college or enrolled or on track to graduate. And if you compare this to the local demographics, where 50% of Newark's families are living in poverty and only 12% of the adult population have a college degree. So that's impressive, right? How did they do this? And so the opening chapter of my book tells their story in more detail, but I'll just share a little bit here. So one of the things the staff did was they embraced this idea of radical listening. Kind of like that TV show Undercover Boss. They did surprise home visits. They called them homework raids, or they would just knock on the door in the evening, and there's, the mom or dad, and inviting them into their home, sitting at the kitchen table. And they were observing, like, what's going on, in this family's life? What are students, really dealing with in real life? And they were paying very close attention to the students' needs and obstacles, things like trauma or violence or self-esteem or poverty. And based on these things that they were learning, they created a rigorous 11-month school year and a boot camp for new students. Another interesting story in the book is a St. Benedict's alumni who was also a Boy Scout leader experimented by taking students on this rigorous hike on the Appalachian Trail. with the goal of no man left behind. And the experience had such an impact on these young men, which they kind of watched and learned, and they decided, let's expand this. So that led to a capstone student-led hike required for all the students. And this idea of no man left behind just started infiltrating other aspects of the school. And they really embraced some wild experiments. They challenged the status quo, what a school is supposed to be, eventually transforming into, believe it or not, a student-led school. And they've been featured on 60 Minutes. There's a PBS documentary about them. They've been featured in books, not just mine, but other books as well. And their story just blows me away. And to me, they exemplify all six of those principles. And they're things that really any nonprofit can do.
That's such a great story. And even just thinking how they're not just in your book, they're in multiple books and stories and media about that. That's just super impressive.
They're inspirational.
Yeah. So thinking about design thinking plays a huge role in kind of your strategy of innovation for nonprofits. Maybe just define how you look at design thinking, and then how does design thinking benefit nonprofits specifically?
I'm a big believer in stealing good ideas wherever you see them. And so you think of a company like Pixar. Pixar's movies have won 23 Academy Awards and are some of the highest grossing animated films of all time, like Toy Story. So I got curious about them. What's the secret to their success? And started reading and researching. So I learned that at Pixar, teams are expected to give what they call brutal feedback to each other. And that was a little bit shocking to hear that. And a Pixar executive says that they assume early on that all of our movies suck. And the job of the creative feedback process is to get the movie from suck to unsuck. And so that same executive then explained that importantly, everyone in the room knows that the questions raised must be in the spirit of making the creative product as good as it possibly can be. And without the manager setting the tone as a safe space, that kind of tough love feedback process would never get off the ground. So then how do they do this? So at the companies like Pixar use a creative process called design thinking, and it's been used by many marketing and design firms. It's been around for some decades. And I think there are some parallels between designing a movie and designing nonprofit programs and interventions. So I think we can definitely thoughtfully translate design thinking techniques, but for our own use in nonprofits. So if design thinking is a process for exploring what's possible and thinking creatively and strategically, so I started testing out design thinking kind of through trial and error with nonprofit teams that I work with. And so what I ended up sharing in the book is kind of the Leah translation of design thinking. If you research out there, you'll see variations of design thinking. But here's what I ended up landing on. So with design thinking, my version of it, we'll ask ourselves three questions: what's desirable, what's scalable, and what's feasible? So those three questions are kind of the thinking part, the brainstorming part. And then there's a fourth question that we follow it up with, which is the action part. And that is then, once we've done that thinking, the fourth is, how might we design pilots and small experiments to test out the thinking that we did in the first three questions? And so then my book includes a chapter on each one of those design thinking questions, and just kind of unpacks with stories and examples how you might take a team through those questions. Or, if you're just reading it on your own, you can just do your own back of the envelope brainstorming about your nonprofit too.
Yeah, that's a great segue into small experiments, because I wanted to ask you, in the book, you advocate for many small experiments. And I wanted to ask, what are some stories, or maybe just one story of a nonprofit who took a small experiment, saw the results, and then scaled that into larger and larger impact?
Yeah. So, as you know, in the nonprofit space, we're often building the plane while flying. And so we also know that our dazzling idea may or may not work. We have to find out. So what we can do is design small experiments, learn and adjust before we scale or grow our idea. So a great example of that comes from World Reader. A World Reader is a nonprofit with a mission to bring digital books to disadvantaged children and their families. And so when they launched in 2010, they began several experiments at the same time. So in one experiment, they gave Amazon Kindle e-reader machines or tablets to a small group of elementary students in Ghana. And what they found was that when the children would play during recess, the devices kept breaking. But at the same time, they were running a second experiment with a mobile app, and which they learned in time from observation worked much better. So they found that the young users much preferred the mobile app over the Kindle e-reader machine. And today, almost 200,000 users a month are reading books on the mobile platform. And I think there are several good lessons here. One is they were really smart to spread their bets. If World Reader just would have gone all in on the Kindle e-reader machine, they may have never discovered the better solution with the mobile app. So to me, it's far better to fail fast and fail small before investing too big. And experimentation helps us learn and innovate. And but with that, we have to build in some expectation and toleration of failure. So I think it's important for leaders and organizations to have the right attitude towards risk and failure. One story I love is from the Hewlett Foundation, where the Hewlett Foundation offers a prize to grants officers and encourages them to share what they called the worst grant from which you learned the most. And they would then have gatherings to just kind of, laugh at themselves and learn. And it just
Sure.
takes the pressure off. It's very human. I think that's great. It just allows us to be honest and fearless and learn. And similarly, where I work at Mercatus, I'm really thankful that we have a board of directors that encourages us to take risks and experiment. And they actually tell us it's okay to fail as long as we're learning. So I think, we can take our ideas into action through these small experiments. And then based on what we learn, we start to get clarity about what works.
I love that. And just a piece about not being afraid to fail as long as you learn and being able to say, okay, what are we hoping to learn from this? Not let's just try it and see what happens. Oh, it failed. What did we learn? Well, we learned we failed. No, there's got to be more to it than that. And it's okay to fund your failures. That's a good thing.
Definitely.
This podcast is brought to you by Anedot. With more than 13 years of serving nonprofits, churches, ministries, campaigns, and schools, Anedot has processed billions of dollars in donations. That experience has guided us in building tools that save your organization time and money. Join more than 30,000 organizations and increase giving today. Learn more at anedot.com. ANEDOT.com. Anedot. Save time and money with powerful giving tools.
Yeah, so another theme in your book is this idea of creating an innovation ecosystem in your nonprofit. So could you share what that is, what you mean by that, as well as what's a good first step in building that innovation ecosystem, and ideally, what does it look like?
So that's where the first kind of third of the book is all about design thinking. The middle part of the book is all about just that question. So one of my favorite stories of this is from Mayo Clinic. So Mayo Clinic is perhaps the best nonprofit hospital in the world. They're famous for finding innovative solutions for people who are very sick. And their reputation didn't happen by accident. In interviews, team members at Mayo Clinic say that good patient outcomes are because the staff is empowered to carry out their organizational values. So one of those values is the needs of the patient come first. And they seem to truly live this. So as you kind of unpack this and learn more about how they do it, team members are trained, empowered, and encouraged to put Mayo values into practice. And I'll quote now from a Mayo staff member who said, if the employee's choices are either getting back to work on time or taking 10 minutes to get a wheelchair for a patient who seems unsteady, the patient will get the wheelchair. And I think that's wonderful. That really is bottom-up empowerment. And these values become part of their workplace culture, guiding all decisions, big or small. In another brief story at Mayo, I was really impressed how the night staff were concerned for how noise can affect the patient's sleep. And this is very important to the healing process. So the night staff came up with this idea to conduct noise studies. And then this led to designing quieter flooring, quieter wheels on carts, and lower decibels for overhead paging. To me, that's innovation and bottom-up empowerment. So this middle section of my book is all about how can we intentionally design processes and systems that support a workplace culture of innovation and bottom-up empowerment, but without losing sight of accountability. And in good news, these are practices that any nonprofit can do with any size staff or budget. And so, for example, questions like, how can your workplace culture help or hinder innovation? And what does that look like? When it comes to decision-making in your organization, are you top-down? Are you bottom-up? And why? What's your thinking behind, who gets to make decisions? What is specific language that supervisors can use to encourage team members to speak up and challenge the status quo? How do we walk the talk with our organizational principles like Mayo Clinic does? The book shares HR practices and recruiting and performance reviews. Our budget process can help or hinder innovation. So what does that look like? Metrics can help or hinder innovation. What does that look like? So this middle section of the book is all about what I call organizational design. And it's just full of stories to illustrate and show you kind of the how of innovation.
So for our audience who are thinking, man, I want to get innovation going in my nonprofit. I want to take a next step. I want to build an ecosystem of innovation. What are some of the challenges that nonprofit leaders are going to face related to kind of taking the next step or increasing innovation if they've already got a strategy in place? And then, how can they overcome those obstacles?
I love that your mind is going right there. Yeah, I think we should be really honest about the messy realities of the nonprofit workplace. There's no doubt that people in nonprofits have passion and heart. We're carrying out a mission, we're serving beneficiaries we care deeply about. So if passion isn't the problem, then what is? What gets in the way of this workplace innovation that we think is so great? Well, there's all sorts of problems, and I'm sure you could guess at some of these. Like one thing I hear a lot is compassion fatigue. We can be stretched too thin. It's a struggle to prioritize and confidently say no to things because our hearts are in it. We don't want to, say no. We want to do many, many things, but we can't. And there can also be this sort of misguided thinking that we don't have time to be strategic. Workplace culture can be an obstacle. There might be fear to speak up. How do we challenge the status quo in our nonprofit workplace? If we fail to empower people on the front lines, the ones who are doing the work, they're going to be the people with the best ideas, like the Mayo Clinic example. And then there's this sort of fog. Good intentions don't automatically mean that we have clarity about what we need to do. And there's this quote by Stephen Covey I like a lot. It's something like, we might be climbing up the ladder, but is our ladder leaning against the right wall in the first place? So there's this sort of fog of good intentions in the nonprofit space. How do we know the best way to design a program? So a great story of this, I love this example from a nonprofit called LifeWorks. They're a nonprofit in Texas that's focused on at-risk youth in Austin. I think that's where you're based out of.
Yes.
So LifeWorks, they were dissatisfied with their programming, and they were doing all right. But they just felt in their guts that they could do better. So they brought their team members together for a series of brainstorms and discussions, and they asked, what is the ultimate problem we're really trying to solve here at our nonprofit? And through discussions and really thinking hard about this, in time, they realized that all of their work really should be laser focused to help each of their clients become self-sufficient. And then they asked some hard questions about each of their 17 programs. Do those programs really put us on a path to achieve that goal? And they realized, well, not in every case. So many of their programs were outdated or just serving other purposes or reflected thinking from many years before. As an example, they looked at their workforce training programs, and they realized that their programming, such as classroom-based programming, while well-intentioned, these trainings, interview practice, and on-the-job skills training was really designed for professional adults rather than for young people wrestling with trauma. And the workforce training program wasn't doing quite as well as it could have because it was a bit misaligned with their clients' true needs. So then next they started looking at models of workforce development trainings in the mental health field for a better fit. And as they created new programming, within a year, they noticed that job retention was measurably increasing. And then they began applying the same scrutiny to all 17 of their programs to make sure they were actually helping an individual young person become more self-sufficient. So to me, what they did here is they asked themselves really hard questions. They understood, like, there's this fog of good intentions. Let's ask tough questions. And they asked, how do we know if what we're doing is working? And their program is continuing to show stronger results for their clients, and they're growing. So I think this is a great example of how, they took these typical nonprofit problems, things that get in the way of innovation. They took it seriously, and they found what works through the process.
I love that. And just thinking about our last question we ask every episode, which is if you are on stage in front of 1,000 nonprofit leaders and you can share one thing, one sentence about nonprofit innovation or innovation for social change, maybe in this instance, what would you say to the audience?
Wow, just one sentence. I would say make the time to be strategic and innovative. It will pay for itself. Inefficiencies and lost opportunities are by far the greater loss.
I love that. I love that. And resources related, obviously pick up Leah's book, Innovation for Social Change. You can find it in the show notes at nonprofitpulse.com. Any other resources you'd recommend, Leah?
Oh, yeah. There's so many out there. In addition to my book, visit my website, leahkral.com, and I've got a free book discussion guide that you can download if you wanted to discuss the book with your own nonprofit teams. And I'm blogging regularly about these topics. But some of my favorite books, I'll just throw out a few. I'm sure you probably read these, but Adam Grant's Think Again, and Hal Gregerson has a book called Questions Are the Answers. And I think both of them are just very thought-provoking and fun about how really the questions of being innovative and effective in our work are in these books. And then recently I learned about something kind of new and cool. So a foundation executive told me to check out this website. It's called Nonprofit Hive, Hive, and it's speed networking for nonprofiters. They just launched last fall, and it's growing like crazy. And I've done a few of these where you just answer maybe 5 questions about yourself, and you get paired up with somebody in the nonprofit space, and you do a speed networking session for about 30 minutes. And it's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed the people I've met. I've learned a lot from it.
That's awesome. Let's give a shout out, nonprofithive.com. I'm going to check that out too. But yeah, you can find that link in Leah's book and website at the show notes. Leah, thanks so much for coming on. And I hope our audience is encouraged, inspired to seek out innovation within their nonprofit and take a next step.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share or leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, head on over to nonprofitpulse.com to sign up for our monthly newsletter, as well as check out all the links and resources in the show notes. We'll see you next time.